Hopefully everyone can see a unicorn on a rope in the middle of the sky. Brilliant. What I'm hoping to do is chat to you just today, just in about 10 minutes or so, on how I used user experience design and some of the principles within that to basically write a kid's book. To get started, this was a final year XD project. So I'd studied interaction design at the art college that I'd completed, I think, summer 2019. Before I'd done this, I'd never written a book. I'd never really done any illustration work before. I think one small project before that, but never really done anything. I had used Illustrator, but that was about it. And I never built an app, let alone one that supported augmented reality. But one of the big things that I really wanted to try and do was coming from at least a background in learning about user experience design and about interaction design, I wanted to do something that didn't necessarily involve a screen, that we didn't need to use an app or a tablet or a device to actually enjoy the experience. But because I was studying interaction design, I had to build an app, but I wanted to do something that enhanced the experience, that lent it, but didn't necessarily was required for that experience to happen. So the brief that I basically given myself in uni was design an interactive and user-centered children's storybook focused on literacy and language development in young kids. And I roughly had about 7 months to do it. Okay. So there was about 3 months of research and analysis and about 3 months of ideation, design and testing, and roughly about 1 month to actually get everything printed, tested and built ready for at least the final year project. And so there's a lot to do in that short space of time. And right now I wouldn't recommend to sort of give yourself 7 months to try and do all of these things, particularly if you haven't done any of these things before. But that was the challenge that I basically decided to give myself for final year. But I really felt that we could use user experience design to do other things other than build websites or build apps. And so I really wanted to try this out. So when we're sort of thinking about like how to get started, we know we want to put the user first, and in this case, it's kids that read books, or even potentially kids that don't read books. And so to start off, it's understanding, well, what's the landscape like? What are the main things that this sort of product needs to have? What are the main sort of at least statistics or touch points that I can sort of focus on as at least leverage for an actual reason to do this project? And some of the key things that I found was that round about sort of 76% of kids read for pleasure, just they enjoy reading books, and that's it. Between 2017 and 2018, research suggested that only between 30 and 50% of parents in the UK read to their kids. So it meant that there was this sort of potential large gap where parents weren't reading to their kids. So, how do we sort of support that? And all of this information was taken from sort of Nielsen book research, and that it was able to sort of jump into and say, okay, so how can we design a product that not only kids want to pick up and read, but also is enjoyable for kids that don't want to read. But in particular, how do we create a book that actually parents want to read? And that was like, for me, sort of a wee core thing of like, how can I make a book that parents want to read just as much, if not more, than their kids do? Because they're the actual sort of buyer, they're the customer, and the kids are the consumers. So it's making sure that we understood that there was those two different audiences as well. Is that a question, or is someone not on mute?
It was not on mute. Work away.
No worries. So sort of all good sort of research, jumping into sort of competitive comparative understanding, what the market was like there already, looking at sort of literature that not only sort of, I guess, I grew up with, but really existed across the last few decades, that could sort of across sort of generations as well, that are still going now. So looking at the likes of Roald Dahl and Dr. Seuss, looking at sort of the top big sellers, the likes of The Gruffalo by Julia Donaldson, but then also looking at the likes of augmented reality apps that are suitable for kids, some that are suitable for adults. What actually can this technology do, and how do we interact with it? And also then going into the likes of a wee bit of surrealism as well. And that's because like surrealism is kind of like tapping into what we'd almost describe as a sort of a child's brain. It's this idea that there's no boundaries in surrealism, kind of the way a child's imagination would work. So I really wanted to look at sort of that from a creative perspective as well, and see like what sort of things that exist within this world could also exist within sort of a children's one. But I'm not a kid, right? I am quite old. I am older than I look. Okay. And so there was no way that I would ever be able to write a children's story sort of properly. And that's where UX really comes into it. And so I decided to get in touch with my old primary school and get chatting about storytelling workshops and running workshops with every class in the primary school. So getting from P1 ages 4 all the way up to sort of P7 up to age 11, and running these storytelling workshops to actually generate these ideas of what types of stories kids like, what types of stories they want to read, but also if they had the ability to create their own story, what would it be? And so I was able to actually get loads, and if not thousands of ideas, like from different post-its and ideas that kids have actually put together, and then sort of put these into a big mass pile of research that would say, okay, this is what kids storytelling is like. And that became the foundation for the book that I'll get onto. Also released an online survey. So wanting to get feedback from parents and from wider audiences about, you know, what types of stories would they read to their kids? What types of stories do their kids like? And just trying to get information about what types of interactions do they have? What types of digital devices do they use? Just to understand customer and consumer behavior as well. Conducted a whole bunch of interviews with parents, kids, teachers, again, just to understand like what technology would they want kids to have, what type of sort of content would they want to be able to see in it, what type of interactions, games, and so on would they want to have. So just building a wider net and a wider understanding of the type of product and certain features that it can sort of basically have in it. And then affinity mapping all of that together, basically taking all that research, sticking it all together and trying to see where the themes exist and where different features and functions can start being developed, and in particular understanding what it was I needed to actually design for this project. So when we actually then set the scene and define what we have a couple of different types of users. We have both parents and kids, kids that enjoy reading, ones that don't, and parents that are able to spend time reading with their kids, and ones that are unable to spend time with their kids. So it's trying to make sure that, okay, how can I design a book that captures the imagination and the motivations for all of those different personas? Building out an experience map as well, trying to understand what are the various touch points, how do we want interactions to actually occur, what actions do we want users to be able to take, and also what opportunities would be available at each of those different steps to engage with the book and to engage with the consumer more. So that was essentially the definition, being able to say, okay, here's roughly the product I'm going to build, here's the people I'm going to do it for, but then it's actually putting together a story. And I've never written a story before, and so took all these ideas that the kids had, like literally hundreds, if not thousands, and used Dan Harmon's story arc. So if you're a fan of Rick and Morty or Community, I used the story arc that he put together in order to actually build a structure to the story. And then sort of grouped all these ideas together to figure out what are the best ones that make sense, what are the ones that make sense together, and how can we structure and group these things. With illustration style, I'm not an illustrator, so it was very difficult for me to do like a hand-drawn style, but I tried and tested different styles out with different age groups to see which ones sort of fitted the audience, which ones they enjoyed the most, and that we could provide then that standard for how illustration will go ahead across the rest of the book. So this is how I draw. All right, that is an example of my drawing ability on the left. And on the right, this is what I was able to convert it to using a mouse and the pen tool in Illustrator. So no graphics tablet, no digital pen, just the mouse and the pen tool in Illustrator. And it meant then I was able to provide a lot more consistency to the style that I was using and really just tweak and configure the design to how I wanted it to look without sort of relying on my imagination, that I could have something tangible that I could move around with as well. Understand I'm a wee bit short of time here, but with literature as well, understanding like how we write for different kids. So taking those ideas together and starting to write nursery rhymes and testing those out with different audiences, testing different reading levels, having it proofed by sort of parents and sort of educational sorts that are able to actually say, this language doesn't make sense. Can you make it a wee bit simpler? And then also building an AR app, building a proof of concept for that. And it's really then about, how do we sort of get these bits and pieces together? So I used Unity because it's free, and I was able to use the Faforia AR plugin because it's free. And it also allowed me to basically quite sort of build an AR app in a very short space of time that was able to give at least proof of concept functionality, which was a mixture of audio narration and 2D pop-up interactivity. So hopefully this will play for me, and I'll be able to show you some of the AR stuff. So onboarding on an app, making sure this is nursery rhyme, so everything else is in rhyme as well, making sure we have big buttons, clear language, and trying to create something that is whimsical and fun at the same time, but also making sure that we are educating and onboarding the user of the app within the product. Then, you scan the book, says which one book you want. So it means we can build in multiple books into that. And then we have audio narration and the 2D pop-up. And then when you actually scan the pages, we have content that is able to hover and interact, from those pages. And that's using image markers. So using the entire page as an image marker to be able to actually place 2D content in a virtual world on top of the page. Some issues have that where there's maybe clipping with certain different assets within that virtual world. And, some of the assets maybe sort of get cut off. But what I wanted to try and do was see, was it possible to create an actual interactive book that enhanced the learning and reading experience? So, users are able to actually read through the book. The entire book is a journey of self-discovery, of identity and self-sacrifice. You follow the story of a single creature. I'm not going to tell you its name. You find that out at the end of the book. But it is a journey about, who we are and what we can be, but for kids. And trying to sort of weld those sort of complex ideas of morality and ethics. I've just actually found it rather easy to do it in nursery rhyme, because it meant then the language you were using was a bit more suitable for kids as well. There is another ones where, so for instance, there is an ebook that you can download, and this wasn't even intentional, but it works kind of on the iPad as well. So you can actually scroll through content. It does break slightly though in some places, but then you actually have content that literally pops out of your iPad, which I thought was a nice way sort of touch afterwards as well. Completely unintentional, but it is a nice thing that you sort of learn using technologies and doing things that you maybe didn't do before, and just about then testing those out with the audience. So where are we now? I was able to do a book launch with the book, basically the kids had done a lot of the research with, got fantastic feedback, got 1,000 out of 50 feedback. So I think that's pretty good. And it meant that I was able to actually do a sort of beta launch and test out the book, test out the app in a sort of live audience with both kids and parents and teachers. And also then understand, like, what do I need to improve upon that? So with feedback and iteration, I was able to introduce chapters to the book. It's not really a long book, it's 88 pages, but it's double page illustrations with 1,000 words in total. but it feels like a long book. So introducing chapters, introducing improved AR functionality, and trying to also support multiple different formats of the book as well. And work's never done, so hopefully by the end of the year I'll have it available on Amazon potentially in both hardback and softcover versions. Augmented reality app still ongoing, so hopefully make that available for both Android and iOS users. This is all in my spare time, which don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'll try and get it done. And also you can go to welcometoyonder.com where you actually are able to download the ebook for free and enjoy it this Christmas. So thank you very much for everyone. Appreciate the time.
Jim, that's unreal. Good plug at the end as well. I think I'm probably one of many that are going to go to directly to that website to download it for my little cousins for Christmas. Yeah, so a few questions came in through the chat. So one was, how easy did you find getting into AR design or development?
Okay, so I'll be honest with you, that one was a wee bit easier because Unity, I mean, it has quite a steep learning curve, but to get started, you just need to install it and follow, a couple of YouTube tutorials or a couple of pages. And so for me, I tried using AR Core and AR Kit, but I'm not a programmer, so that sort of prevented me from almost doing anything there. But with Vuforia, it was literally drag and drop assets into the Unity environment. So I was able to actually build the image markers, literally export the illustrations and bring them in as assets into the Unity environment. So it meant then I was able to toy around a wee bit more. But it is a plan to thoroughly learn C# and actually try and utilize a bit more of the power that Unity and a lot of the AR kits and stuff have now. But it wasn't that difficult to get started.
Unreal. And then was there any unique challenges compared to more traditional UX design?
Illustration, writing. I mean, yeah, there is UX copy, but I'm not a UX writer, so and the development. So it was a mixture of all of them. So it wouldn't maybe be your traditional sort of output for a UX project. But it definitely, I think, allowed me to understand the complexities of each of those maybe different roles within a UX environment, to understand that, what's written and what's then presented visually have to make sense together. So if I illustrate a page, I have to make sure that the text that I have maybe written previously makes sense on that page. And if it doesn't, rewrite an entire rhyme to provide the same context, but with different content. And that, I'm sure if any UX writers or any, they'll know that can be very, very difficult to get right. So it's doing that, and then also, never really doing illustration before and trying to build. So you're literally adding on all of those different things on top of the UX process as well. So good fun though.
Yeah. One thing as well, I wrote this because I find it hilarious, was I think I saw a post-it that said fart when from the kids. And my question is, what was the funniest thing that you got?
So there was, what you found was that kids really do absorb everything around them. I don't have kids, so I don't have any personal evidence of that. But when you ask a child to write a story and they have freedom to do that, and then you discover that Trump's in Russia with the Illuminati in the middle of a kid's story, you realize that they're sitting there and the news is going blasted maybe in the background, and they're just absorbing this content and then putting it in. And what I found was the older kids got, the more reserved, I guess, with their imagination it became. So it actually became a bit more here's movies that I've watched and the stories I want to tell with those, or here's games I've played and here's the stories I want to tell about that, as opposed to here's something I've completely made up. So definitely as kids get older, there's maybe more restraint in the imagination that they want to use. But I definitely think finding that Terry, who's the unicorn of the story, finding Terry go with Donald Trump to Russia to investigate the Illuminati, I thought was one of the greatest things I could ever come across within a kid's story. And that was, I think that was by a 6-year-old as well.
Oh my gosh. So it's so amazing. I love it. So also Chris said that UX sometimes feels like a storytelling exercise. Did you find this helped build the story of the book? So that's sort of duality.
Yeah. I think when you realize that you can't just wing it as much as we want to, you can't. And particularly what I found, like writing a story was like, there is that structure. There is a start, a middle, and an end. And in between those, there's different stages. And in between those stages, there's different things that need to happen. So definitely when we like sort of try and tell the story within the UX process of, a product, a feature, or function that we're engaged with and actually doing testing on and designing, that, we need to make sure that we're telling that story at every part of the journey, and that it makes sense at every part of the journey. And that's actually one thing I found was difficult, was jumping from one scene to the next in a way that was coherent, that allowed you to continue a story without having 4 or 5 pages of just, a unicorn stuck up a tree. So it meant then, having those clear structures, I think definitely is what like really helps tell the UX story in normal product development. And that, like, for me it just made it a lot easier to actually write and prepare an entire book.
Love it. Another question is here, was there any coding involved with the entire project?
At the start, with a wee bit of C#, I was trying to learn AR core, and it went completely over my head. I do a bit of HTML and CSS, and that was really it. I built the first promo sort of wee launch site in HTML and CSS. Then I used WordPress for the final site because it's just easier to manage. But in terms of everything, in terms of actually the overall build, there's not actually any code. There should be. Don't get me wrong, there should be. The AR app should be, built with C#, probably in using AR core, or even the Unity AR plugins that are available. They actually enhance just the performance and what it needed to do. So that is going to be at least the future of the functionality within the app, is that it will have code involved.
Awesome. And then just last question, because we're just at time, is apart from going forward, do you have any plans for other books?
Yes. So the next one I'm trying to write now is called Dinosaurs with Jetpacks.
Yes. Excellent.
Educational book.
Unbelievable. If you want to just, if there's any more questions to come up, please fire them in the chat, and then sure, Jim, if you want, you can message away and stuff. But no, that's awesome.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone.